Ever wondered what happens when a mail-order bride arrives to find her intended husband dead in a silver mine? Eva Sterling traveled 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a stranger only to discover Marcus Blackwood's body in an abandoned mine shaft. But it's the letter clutched in his frozen hand that will change everything she thought she knew about love betrayal and the dark secrets hiding in the Colorado mountains. This is a story of mystery redemption and a love that grows from the ashes of tragedy. If you're ready for a Western romance that will keep you guessing until the very end, hit that like button and let's dive into Eva's incredible journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more captivating stories like this one. She found him dead in the silver mine, but his final letter changed everything. The train wheezed to a stop at Cedar Ridge Station like a dying animal, steam hissing from its belly into the thin December air. Eva Sterling stepped onto the wooden platform, her gloved hand clutching a carpet bag that contained everything she owned in this world. The altitude made her dizzy, or perhaps it was fear. At 24, she had traveled further from Boston than she ever imagined possible, chasing a promise made by a stranger through letters written in careful, educated script. Snow fell in lazy spirals around the depot, dusting the shoulders of miners and ranch hands who waited for cargo to be unloaded. Cedar Ridge clung to the mountainside like a collection of wooden boxes someone had scattered and forgotten to pick up. The silver boom that built this town was already fading, leaving behind empty storefronts and the hollow echo of dreams deferred. Eva pulled Marcus Blackwood's last letter from her coat pocket, reading the familiar words one more time. My dearest Eva, I await your arrival with great anticipation. The Sunrise Mine has been good to me, and I believe we shall build a comfortable life together. Look for me at the station. I will be the man with the silver watch chain waiting to make you my bride. But the platform emptied and no man with a silver watch chain appeared. The station master, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers, noticed her standing alone as the train prepared to depart. You waiting on someone, Mr. Marcus Blackwood? He was supposed to meet me. The man's expression shifted, something like pity crossing his weathered features. Blackwood, you say haven't seen him in town for nigh on 2 weeks. You might try asking at the Silver Dollar. That's where the mine owners usually drink. Eva's stomach clenched. She had $17.32 to her name. The return ticket to Boston would cost more than twice that amount. But more than poverty, it was the thought of returning to her stepmother's house that made her legs weak. The woman had made it clear that Eva's presence was no longer welcome after her father's debts had consumed their family fortune. The Silver Dollar Saloon squatted between a general store and a barber shop, its windows glowing yellow in the gathering dusk. Eva hesitated at the entrance, propriety warring with desperation. A proper lady did not enter such establishments. But a proper lady also did not travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, and Eva had long since left propriety behind. The saloon fell silent when she entered, 20 pairs of male eyes tracking her movement. The air hung thick with tobacco smoke and whiskey fumes. A man at the piano stopped mid-song, his fingers freezing above the keys. I'm looking for Marcus Blackwood, Eva announced, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. A bartender with rolled-up sleeves and forearms like tree trunks studied her carefully. You'd be the bride he was expecting. Yes. Murmurs rippled through the room. Men exchanged glances that spoke of shared knowledge of a story she was not yet part of. Ma'am, said a voice from the back of the room. A tall man emerged from the shadows, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Name's Tobias McKenna. I think you better sit down. Something in his tone made Eva's knees buckle. She allowed him to guide her to a table in the corner, away from the curious stares of the other patrons. He was younger than his voice suggested, perhaps 32 or 33, with the kind of weathered hands that spoke of hard work and careful attention to detail. Marcus Blackwood is dead, miss. Has been for 2 weeks now. The words hit Eva like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white beneath her gloves. Dead? How I found him in the old Sunrise mine shaft. Looks like he fell and hit his head on the rocks. Been going down there alone, prospecting in sections the company abandoned. Dangerous work for a man by himself. Eva stared at Tobias, trying to process what he was telling her. Marcus Blackwood, the man who had written her such careful, hopeful letters, who had promised her security and companionship, was lying cold in some mountain grave. But he wrote to me, she whispered, just 3 weeks ago. He said the mine was producing well, that he was preparing for my arrival. Tobias's eyes softened. I'm sorry, miss. Truly sorry. Did you travel far? Boston. He nodded as if this explained something. You got family to wire someone who might send money for passage home. The question hung in the smoky air between them. Aviva could lie, could maintain some shred of dignity by pretending she had options. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. No, no one. Tobias studied her for a long moment, and Eva saw something in his expression shift. Not pity exactly, but recognition. As if he understood what it meant to have nowhere to turn. There's a boarding house on Maple Street, he said quietly. Woman named Sarah Chen runs it. She's got a heart bigger than this mountain, and she's been known to offer work to folks who find themselves in difficult circumstances. Work. Cooking, cleaning, mending, honest work for honest pay. Won't make you rich, but it'll keep you fed and warm while you figure out what comes next. Ava felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of panic that had been tightening since she stepped off the train. Why are you helping me? Tobias was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Let's just say I know what it's like to be a long way from home with nowhere to go. They walked through the darkening streets of Cedar Ridge, Ava's boots crunching in the snow while Tobias carried her bag. The boarding house turned out to be a modest two-story building, painted pale blue with warm light spilling from its windows. A sign by the door read, Chen's Boarding House. Clean rooms, fair rates. Outsauce again, Buzz. Sarah Chen answered their knock immediately as if she had been expecting them. She was a small woman in her 30s with intelligent dark eyes and graying hair pinned back in a practical bun. A boy of perhaps 8 years old peered around her skirts, studying Eva with frank curiosity. Tobias, Sarah said warmly, what brings you to town so late? This is Miss Eva Sterling. She came to marry Marcus Blackwood, but... Sarah's expression shifted, understanding immediately. Oh, dear child, come in from the cold. The interior of the boarding house was simple but welcoming. Quilts covered well-worn furniture, and the smell of bread baking drifted from the kitchen. The boy continued to stare at Eva with unblinking attention, his head tilted slightly to one side. This is my son Daniel, Sarah explained. He doesn't speak, but he understands everything. Eva knelt to Daniel's eye level, something about the boy's solemn expression tugging at her heart. Hello, Daniel. The boy's eyes widened slightly, but he made no sound. Instead, he raised his hands and moved them in fluid, graceful gestures that Eva didn't recognize but somehow understood meant welcome. He uses sign language, Sarah explained. Learned it from a traveling preacher who stayed with us last year. Daniel's been quiet since his father died. Ava watched the boy's hands move, fascinated by the elegance of his communication. In Boston, she had known several deaf students at the school where she'd briefly taught before her father's financial ruin. The memory of those bright, eager faces made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. I know some sign language, Ava said quietly, then moved her hands in careful, remembered gestures. Nice to meet you, Daniel. The boy's face lit up with such pure joy that Eva felt tears prick her eyes. He responded rapidly, his hands flying through signs too quick for her limited knowledge to follow. He says you have kind eyes. Sarah translated, her own voice soft with emotion. He doesn't often take to strangers so quickly. Tobias had been watching this exchange with interest. Miss Sterling needs work, Sarah, and a place to stay. I thought maybe... Of course, Sarah's response was immediate. We can always use help with the cooking and laundry. The miners don't pay much, but they pay regular. You'll have your own room and meals, plus a small wage. Eva felt overwhelmed by this sudden kindness from strangers. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks needed, Sarah said firmly. We look after each other in Cedar Ridge. It's how we survive the hard times. As Tobias prepared to leave, he paused at the door. I'll stop by in a few days, see how you're settling in. After he was gone, Sarah showed Eva to a small but clean room on the second floor. The window looked out over the snow-covered rooftops toward the mountains, where the silver mines carved dark scars into the landscape. Marcus Blackwood was a good man, Sarah said quietly as Eva unpacked her few belongings. It's a shame what happened to him. Did you know him well? Sarah hesitated, her hands smoothing the quilt on Eva's bed. Well enough. He used to board here before he bought his house up the ridge. Always paid his bills on time, never caused trouble. But he was troubled, I think. Carried some burden that weighed on him. What kind of burden? The kind of secrets men carry when they've seen too much, done too much. The mine business isn't clean, Miss Sterling. There's money to be made, but it comes out of pride. Marcus knew that better than most. Eva wanted to ask more questions, but something in Sarah's expression warned her that certain subjects were better left unexplored, at least for now. That night, Eva lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind howl down from the mountains. She thought about Marcus Blackwood, the man she had never met, but who had represented safety and possibility. His letters had been formal, but kind, painting a picture of a life that might have been comfortable if not passionate. Now he was dead, and she was alone in a mining town high in the Colorado Rockies, dependent on the kindness of strangers. But strangely, she felt more hope than despair. For the first time in years, she was not living in someone else's house, subject to someone else's rules and whims. She was earning her own way, building something with her own hands. The next morning, Eva woke before dawn and helped Sarah prepare breakfast for the 6 miners who boarded with them. The work was physical but satisfying, kneading bread, frying bacon, brewing coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, watching her every movement with solemn attention. During a brief lull, Eva sat beside him and began to teach him the sign for different breakfast foods. Bread she showed him, forming the letters with her fingers. Eggs. Coffee. Daniel absorbed each new sign with intense concentration, then began combining them into sentences. The bread smells good, he signed carefully. I like eggs with salt. You're a natural teacher, Sarah observed, refilling Eva's coffee cup. Daniel hasn't been this animated in months. He's very bright. His signs are so precise, so thoughtful. Sarah's expression grew sad. He wasn't always quiet. Before his father died, he was the most talkative child you ever saw, chattering from sunrise to sunset. But when Michael fell in the mine shaft, she shook her head. Daniel hasn't spoken a word since. The doctor says there's nothing physically wrong with him. It's grief, pure and simple. Eva felt a familiar ache in her chest. She understood grief that stole voices, that made the world feel too large and empty to fill with words. After her father's suicide, she had gone weeks barely speaking, moving through her days like a ghost haunting her own life. The miners began arriving for their midday meal, stomping snow off their boots and filling the boarding house with boisterous conversation. Aviva served them with efficient courtesy, learning their names and preferences. They were rough men hardened by dangerous work, but they treated her with surprising gentleness. You're Marcus Blackwood's intended bride, observed a grizzled prospector named Pete Garrison. Shame about what happened to him. He was looking forward to your arrival, something fierce. Did he talk about me? Eva asked, surprised by her own curiosity. Oh yes, showed us your picture, read parts of your letters, said you were educated, refined, said he was lucky a woman like you would consider a rough man like him. Eva felt an unexpected pang of sadness for the man she'd never met. Marcus Blackwood had been real, had had hopes and dreams centered around their future together. His death wasn't just an inconvenience to her plans, it was the end of a human story. That afternoon, while Sarah napped and Daniel practiced his letters, Eva decided to visit the cemetery where Marcus was buried. The graveyard sat on a hill overlooking the town, its headstones dusted with snow, like small monuments to forgotten dreams. She found Marcus Blackwood's grave easily. The earth was still fresh, the wooden cross bearing his name still new. Someone had placed a bouquet of dried wildflowers at the base of the marker. Eva stood there in the falling snow, feeling the weight of all the conversations they would never have, all the shared meals and quiet evenings that would never come to pass. She hadn't loved him, might never have loved him, but she mourned the possibility he had represented. I'm sorry, she whispered to the grave. I'm sorry we didn't get the chance to see what we might have built together. He would have liked that. Eva turned to find Tobias standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. She hadn't heard his approach, the snow muffling his footsteps. I didn't mean to intrude, he said. I was visiting my own family's graves and saw you here. Your family is buried here too. Tobias nodded toward a section of the cemetery where several matching headstones stood in a neat row. My parents, my younger brother. Fever took them all in the winter of '83. I was away serving as a medic in the cavalry. Didn't even know they were sick until I got the telegram saying they were gone. I ever heard the familiar weight of guilt in his voice, the self-recrimination that came with surviving when others didn't. You couldn't have known. No, but I tell myself I should have been here. Should have been able to do something. He was quiet for a moment, studying the mountains in the distance. Marcus felt the same way about the men who died in his mine. Thought if he'd been more careful, more diligent, he could have prevented the accidents. What accidents? Tobias seemed to realize he'd said too much. The mine business is dangerous, Miss Sterling. Men die underground. It's a fact of life up here. But Eva sensed there was more to the story, something that explained Sarah's cryptic comments about Marcus carrying burdens. She filed the information away instinctively, understanding that pushing for answers would only close doors. They walked back to town together as the sun began to set behind the peaks. The temperature was dropping rapidly, their breath forming clouds in the crystal air. "You settling in all right at Sarah's place?" Tobias asked. "Better than I expected. The work is good, honest. And Daniel," Eva smiled, thinking of the boy's careful hands forming words in the air. "He reminds me of my students back in Boston. Bright and eager to learn. You were a teacher for a while before my father's business failed and we lost everything." Tobias was quiet for a moment. "Must have been hard giving up work you loved." "I thought it was the end of everything, but now—" Eva paused, surprised by her own realization. "Now I wonder if maybe it was just the end of one story so another could begin." They had reached the boarding house, warm light spilling from its windows onto the snowy street. Through the glass, Eva could see Daniel setting the table for supper, his movements careful and precise. "Would you like to join us for the evening meal?" Eva found herself asking. "Sarah always makes extra, and I know Daniel enjoys your company." Tobias hesitated, and Eva saw something vulnerable cross his features. "I don't want to impose." "You wouldn't be. You helped me when I needed it most. The least I can do is offer you a home-cooked meal." He smiled, then really smiled, and Eva felt something warm unfurl in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was recognition. They were two people who had learned to be careful with hope, to expect disappointment, but remain open to small kindnesses. As they entered the boarding house together, Eva caught sight of their reflection in the hallway mirror. They looked like what they were, two survivors who had found their way to the same warm place on a cold night. It was a beginning, tentative and fragile, but real nonetheless. During supper, Eva watched Tobias interact with Daniel, signing simple words and praising the boys' responses. She saw how Sarah's face softened when she looked at them all gathered around her table. For the first time since leaving Boston, Eva felt like she was part of something larger than her own survival. Later, as she prepared for bed, Eva wrote in her journal, a habit she'd maintained since childhood. December 15th, 1887, she began. "Today I learned that the man I came to marry is dead, but somehow I feel more alive than I have in months. Perhaps grief and hope are not opposites, but neighbors living so close together that sometimes it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins." Outside her window, snow continued to fall on Cedar Ridge, covering the scars left by pickaxes and dynamite, making the mountain town look peaceful and innocent in the moonlight. But Eva was beginning to understand that beneath the surface of this place lay secrets as deep and dangerous as the mine shafts themselves. And somewhere in the labyrinth of her own heart, she was beginning to understand that the life she had planned to build with Marcus Blackwood might have been safe and respectable, but it would never have challenged her to become the woman she was meant to be. As she drifted off to sleep, Eva's last conscious thought was of Tobias's hands as he signed words to Daniel. Gentle and strong and infinitely patient. Hands that knew how to heal, how to build, how to offer comfort without demanding anything in return. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new mysteries to unravel, new chances to discover what kind of life she could create from the ashes of her old dreams. But tonight, for the first time in months, Eva Sterling slept peacefully unafraid of what morning might bring. 3 weeks had passed since Eva's arrival in Cedar Ridge, and she had settled into the rhythms of life at Sarah Chen's boarding house with surprising ease. Her hands had grown accustomed to the constant work, washing linens in water so cold it made her fingers ache kneading bread, before dawn mending torn clothes by lamplight after the supper dishes were done. But it was the quiet moments that surprised her most. The way Daniel would appear at her elbow while she worked, his small hands moving in graceful signs to ask questions about the world beyond Cedar Ridge. The way Sarah hummed Chinese lullabies while she cooked melodies that seemed to come from some deep well of memory. The way the miners, rough as they were, lowered their voices when they spoke of their families back east as if their love was too precious to handle carelessly. And there were Tobias's visits, which had become as regular as sunrise. He appeared every few days with some excuse, needed supplies from town, wanted to check on a horse being reshod at the blacksmith, had heard news from Denver he thought Sarah might find interesting. But Eva noticed how his eyes found her first when he entered the boarding house, how his shoulders seemed to relax when she smiled at him. This morning found Eva in the boarding house kitchen preparing breakfast while snow fell steadily outside. Daniel sat at the wooden table practicing the alphabet in sign language. His fingers moved with increasing confidence, and Eva felt a familiar warmth watching his progress. "What is your favorite color?" Daniel signed, his expression serious. Blue. Eva responded, "Like the sky before snow falls." "What is yours?" Daniel considered this carefully. "Silver," he signed finally, "like the metal in the mountains." Something about his choice struck Eva as oddly adult for an 8-year-old boy. Before she could explore the thought further, Sarah entered the kitchen carrying a letter. "This came for you," Sarah said, handing Eva an envelope with Boston postmarks. "From your stepmother, perhaps?" Eva's stomach clenched as she recognized the sharp handwriting. She had written to Mrs. Pemberton shortly after arriving in Cedar Ridge, informing her of Marcus Blackwood's death and her decision to remain in Colorado. She had not expected a response. The letter was brief and coldly formal. "Evangeline, your decision to remain among those frontier people is proof of the willful nature that always concerned your dear father. Do not expect assistance from this family should your current circumstances prove inadequate. You have made your bed, as they say. Cordially, Mrs. Margaret Pemberton." Ava folded the letter carefully, her face revealing nothing of the hurt that twisted in her chest. But Daniel was watching her with those unnervingly perceptive eyes, and his hands moved in a quick, worried question. "Bad news, no." Eva signed back, managing a smile. "Just someone saying goodbye." Sarah, who had been pretending not to watch this exchange, began slicing bacon with more force than necessary. "Some people," she muttered, "wouldn't recognize kindness if it bit them on the behind." Despite her pain, Eva laughed. "Sarah Chen, I'm shocked by your language." "Well, it's true. Anyone with eyes can see you're 10 times the woman you were 3 weeks ago. Working with purpose suits you." It was true, Eva realized. The constant physical labor had strengthened her body, but more than that, the sense of contributing something meaningful had strengthened her spirit. She was not merely existing anymore. She was building something, adding her own thread to the fabric of this strange little community. The morning proceeded normally until Pete Garrison arrived for breakfast, looking unusually troubled. The grizzled prospector sat heavily at the table, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by something darker. "What's got you looking like death warmed over, Pete?" asked another miner, Tom Bradley. Pete glanced around the kitchen, his eyes lingering on Daniel before he spoke. "Found something odd up at the old Sunrise mine yesterday. Was poking around the area where they found Marcus Blackwood, and I noticed something the sheriff's investigation missed." Eva's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "What kind of something?" "Scratch marks on the rocks around the mine shaft. Fresh ones. Like someone was trying to climb out, or—" Pete paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Or like someone was pushed in and tried to stop their fall." The kitchen fell silent except for the crackling of wood in the stove. Eva felt ice forming in her veins. "Are you saying Marcus's death wasn't an accident?" "I'm saying maybe the sheriff should have looked closer before ruling it an accident," Pete replied carefully. "Marcus was an experienced miner. He knew those shafts better than anyone. Doesn't make sense he'd just slip and fall." Sarah's face had gone pale. Daniel, sensing the adult tension, had stopped practicing his letters and was watching the conversation with wide, frightened eyes. "Who else knows about these scratch marks?" Sarah asked quietly. "Just me for now. Haven't decided whether to tell Sheriff Morrison or not. That man's about as useful as a chocolate teapot when it comes to investigating anything more complicated than a bar fight." Eva's mind raced. If Marcus had been murdered, who would have wanted him dead and why? The man she had corresponded with had seemed gentle, educated, hardly the type to make deadly enemies. "Pete," she said carefully, "you knew Marcus well. Did he have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt him?" Pete shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Marcus was a complicated man, Miss Sterling. He owned the Sunrise mine, but he also had interests in other claims around the territory. The mining business, it's not always conducted in a Christian manner, if you catch my meaning. Before Eva could ask for clarification, the boarding house door opened and Tobias entered, stamping snow from his boots. He took one look at the tense faces around the kitchen table, and his expression grew alert. What's happened? Pete repeated his story about the scratch marks, and Eva watched Tobias's reaction carefully. Something flickered across his features. Not surprise exactly, but recognition, as if this news confirmed something he had already suspected. Have you told anyone else about this? Tobias asked. No, I wanted to think it through first. Marcus is already buried and stirring up trouble won't bring him back. But if someone killed him, Pete's voice trailed off, then that someone is still walking around free, Eva finished. The thought sent a chill down her spine that it had nothing to do with the winter weather. Tobias was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. Finally, he spoke. There's something you should know about Marcus Blackwood. Something I probably should have told you before now, Miss Sterling. Eva's heart began to beat faster. What? Marcus and I weren't just acquaintance. We were partners of a sort. I provided medical services to his miners treated injuries when they happened. And there were more injuries than usual at the Sunrise mine. Sarah's intake of breath was sharp and sudden. Tobias, no. Don't. But Tobias continued, his voice heavy with guilt. The Sunrise mine hit a vein of silver about 6 months ago. Rich, sure, the kind that makes men wealthy overnight. But there was a problem. The new section where they were digging had unusually high levels of mercury in the rock. Working in those conditions without proper protection. Mercury poisoning, Eva said, her teacher's education filling into the blanks. That's what was killing the miners. Marcus knew. I told him, warned him about the dangers. But shutting down the most profitable section of his mine would have cost him everything. He'd borrowed heavily to expand operations, and his creditors were pressing for payment. Pete Garrison's face had gone ashen. Jesus Christ. You're saying Marcus let his men keep working in poisoned air because he needed the money? I'm saying Marcus was trapped between impossible choices. He tried to implement safety measures, better ventilation, shorter shifts. But men were still getting sick, and some, Tobias's voice broke slightly, some were dying. The kitchen was completely silent now, except for the sound of Daniel's quiet breathing. The boy seemed to understand that the adults were discussing something terrible, even if he couldn't follow the details. How many men died? Eva asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. 7 over the past 4 months. Their families were told it was cave-ins, gas explosions, the usual mine accidents. But I knew better, and eventually so did Marcus. That's why he was going to the mine alone, Sarah said quietly. He was trying to find a way to extract the silver safely without putting more men at risk. Tobias nodded. He'd been working on a new ventilation system, spending all his time up there trying to solve the problem. Said he couldn't live with any more blood on his hands. Eva felt sick. The man she had come to marry had been carrying the weight of 7 deaths, trying desperately to find a solution that would save his remaining workers while keeping his business afloat. No wonder his letters had sometimes seemed strained, distracted. But if someone found out the truth about those deaths, Pete said slowly, they might have wanted revenge, might have decided to take justice into their own hands. Or why, Tobias added grimly, someone might have wanted to silence Marcus before he could expose what was really happening at the mine. There are powerful people in this territory who have investments tied to the mining industry. If word got out that owners were knowingly poisoning their workers, it would destroy confidence in the entire Colorado silver market. Eva finished, her mind working through the implications. Someone with significant financial interest might kill to prevent that kind of scandal. They sat in somber silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Eva found herself remembering Marcus's letters with new understanding. The careful way he had described his work, the occasional mentions of difficulties with his business partners, the sense she had always had that he was holding something back. Daniel, who had been quietly observing the adult conversation, suddenly stood and walked to the kitchen window. He pressed his face to the glass, his breath fogging the cold surface. Then his hands moved in urgent, frightened signs. Man outside, he gestured. watching the house. Eva joined him at the window and peered through the falling snow. At first, she saw nothing but the empty street and snow-covered buildings. Then a shadow moved between two houses across the way, and she caught a glimpse of a figure in a dark coat. "Someone's out there," she confirmed quietly, "just standing in the snow watching us." Tobias was at the window immediately, his hand moving instinctively to his hip, where Eva noticed he wore a gun beneath his coat. "I don't see anyone now." "He was there," Daniel signed insistently. Big man, hat pulled down, he was writing something. Writing, Eva translated for the others. Pete Garrison stood up abruptly, his face grim. "I'm thinking maybe I stirred up more trouble than I intended by poking around that mine shaft. If someone killed Marcus and they think I'm getting too close to the truth." "You're all staying here tonight," Sarah announced in a tone that brooked no argument. "I've got spare rooms and there's safety in numbers." "Sarah, I can't ask you to put yourself and Daniel in danger," Tobias protested. "You're not asking, I'm telling." Sarah's small frame seemed to grow larger with determination. "This is my house and I decide who's welcome here. Besides, Daniel's father died in Marcus's mine. If there's justice to be found for those men, I want to be part of finding it." Eva looked at Sarah with new understanding. "Your husband was one of the 7 who died from mercury poisoning." Sarah nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "Michael started getting sick in September. Headaches, tremors, trouble speaking clearly. The company doctor said it was exhaustion, told him to take a few days rest. But it kept getting worse, and by October..." She wiped her eyes with her apron. "He died in his sleep, and I never knew why until now." Daniel had been watching his mother's face, reading her emotions with the sensitivity of a child who had learned to communicate through observation. His small hands moved in a question. Papa was poisoned. Sarah knelt beside her son, gathering him into her arms. For a moment, she couldn't find words. Then she nodded, her voice thick with grief and anger. "Yes, sweetheart, Papa was poisoned, and the men who did it lied to us about it." Daniel's face crumpled, and for a moment Eva thought he might finally speak, might let loose the voice that had been trapped inside him since his father's death. But instead, he buried his face against his mother's shoulder and wept silently, his small body shaking with rage and sorrow. Eva felt her own anger building a clean, bright flame that burned away her fear. These people had become her family in the weeks since her arrival, and someone had hurt them deliberately, callously. Someone had poisoned Daniel's father and 6 other men, then killed Marcus Blackwood to cover up the crime. "We need to go to the sheriff," she said firmly. "Sheriff Morrison is either corrupt or incompetent," Pete replied. "Maybe both. He ruled those mine deaths accidental awfully quick without much investigation." "Then we go to the territorial authorities in Denver," Eva insisted. "This is bigger than Cedar Ridge now. Those men deserve justice and their families deserve the truth. Getting to Denver means a 2-day ride through mountain passes in winter," Tobias pointed out. "And if whoever killed Marcus realizes we're carrying evidence, then we make sure they don't realize it," Eva said. "We plan carefully, and we make sure someone gets the truth to people who can act on it." As they discussed their options, Eva became aware that she had crossed some invisible line. 3 weeks ago, she had been a desperate woman fleeing an impossible situation. Now she was part of a community invested in its people and their struggles. The scared girl who had stepped off the train on that snowy Christmas Eve was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more purposeful. That evening, as promised, they all gathered in Sarah's boarding house for safety. Pete and Tobias shared a room while Eva helped Sarah put Daniel to bed in the family's private quarters. The boy was still shaken by the revelation about his father's death, but his grief seemed cleaner, now less confused. "Will the bad men be punished?" he signed to Eva as she tucked him in. "Yes," she replied with more confidence than she felt. "We'll make sure they are." Daniel studied her face for a long moment, then signed something that made Eva's throat tight with emotion. "You're brave like Papa was brave." After Daniel was asleep, the adults gathered in Sarah's small sitting room to make plans. The room was cozy, filled with handmade furniture and Chinese decorations that spoke of Sarah's heritage. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I've been thinking about what Pete found at the mine," Tobias said, his voice low so as not to wake Daniel. "Those scratch marks might not be the only evidence. Marcus was a careful man, meticulous about his business records. If he was documenting the mercury poisoning trying to find a solution, he would have kept records, Eva finished. Medical documentation, correspondence with suppliers about safety equipment, maybe even letters to authorities. His house has been empty since he died, Sarah added. Sheriff Morrison sealed it after the investigation, but that was just for show. No one's been watching it. Pete leaned forward in his chair. You're suggesting we break into a dead man's house. I'm suggesting we look for evidence that might help us understand what really happened, Tobias corrected. Marcus left that mine to his business partner in Denver, man named Cornelius Ashford. If Ashford was involved in the cover-up, or if he ordered Marcus killed to protect his investment, then Marcus's records might be the only way to prove it, Eva said. They planned carefully. Tobias would approach Marcus's house from the back, using his medical bag as cover if anyone saw him. He could claim he was retrieving medicine he'd left there while treating Marcus's final illness. Eva insisted on going with him, arguing that she had a legal right to collect Marcus's personal effects almost as his intended bride. Absolutely not, Tobias said firmly. If we're caught, I can talk my way out of trouble easier than you can. Two people can search faster than one, Eva countered. And if there are business documents, I can read and interpret them quickly. I was trained in bookkeeping and correspondence. Sarah supported Eva's position. She's right, Tobias. And besides, if someone's watching Marcus's house, they'll be looking for suspicious activity. A woman collecting her dead fiancé's belongings isn't suspicious. After much debate, they agreed on the plan. Tomorrow night, while Pete kept watch from the main road, Tobias and Eva would search Marcus's house for any documents that might shed light on his death. Sarah would stay at the boarding house with Daniel, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. As they prepared to retire for the night, Eva found herself alone with Tobias by the dying fire. The others had gone upstairs, leaving them in the comfortable semi-darkness of the sitting room. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. This isn't your fight, Eva. You could leave Cedar Ridge, start over somewhere safe. Eva studied his face in the firelight, seeing the concern there, the growing affection that neither of them had yet named aloud. A month ago, you might have been right, but these people are my family now. Daniel, Sarah, even Pete. They've given me something I didn't know I was missing. What's that? A place where I matter, where what I do and say and feel has weight in the world. She paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. And you've given me something too. Tobias's eyes searched her face. What? You've shown me that it's possible to start over without running away, to build something new without destroying what came before. Eva felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she pressed on. I came here to marry Marcus Blackwood because I thought I needed someone to save me. But you've helped me understand that the only person who can save me is myself. And have you saved yourself? Eva smiled, thinking of the woman who had stepped off that train just weeks ago, desperate, dependent, defined entirely by other people's needs and expectations. I think so. At least I'm learning how. Tobias reached for her hand, his fingers warm and calloused from years of hard work. For what it's worth, I think you're the strongest person I've ever known. Even though I'm scared half to death about tomorrow night. Especially because you're scared. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Eva. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. They sat there in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching the fire burn down to glowing embers. Outside, the wind howled down from the mountains, rattling the windows and reminding them of the harsh world beyond these warm walls. But inside Sarah Chen's boarding house, surrounded by people who cared about each other's welfare, Eva felt safer than she had since childhood. Tomorrow would bring danger, uncertainty, the possibility of truth that might shatter more than one life. But tonight she was exactly where she belonged, holding hands with a man who saw her strength instead of her vulnerability, planning to fight for justice alongside people who had become her chosen family. Whatever tomorrow revealed about Marcus Blackwood's death, about the corruption that had poisoned this mountain community, Eva knew she was strong enough to face it. The frightened girl from Boston was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to defend the things that mattered to her. As she finally went upstairs to her room, Eva's last thought was of Daniel's words, "You're brave like Papa was brave." She hoped that was true, because tomorrow she was going to need every bit of courage she possessed. The next evening arrived with a bone-deep cold that made the snow squeak under their feet. Eva wrapped her heaviest shawl around her shoulders as she and Tobias made their way through the empty streets of Cedar Ridge toward Marcus Blackwood's house. The mining town felt deserted, most residents sensibly huddled around their fires rather than venturing into the bitter night. Marcus's house sat on a ridge overlooking the town, a modest two-story structure that spoke of a man who had means but not ostentation. Snow had drifted against the front door, and the windows stared down at them like empty eyes. Eva felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather as Tobias produced a key from his pocket. "Marcus gave me this when he was sick last spring," he explained quietly, "in case of emergency." The house smelled of abandonment, that particular mustiness that accumulates when no one has opened windows or stirred the air for weeks. Tobias lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low to avoid attracting attention from outside. The interior was neat, almost Spartan. Marcus had lived like a man who expected to be temporary everywhere, who had never quite settled into the idea of permanence. The sitting room contained a desk, two chairs, and shelves lined with books about mining, geology, and engineering. "His study is upstairs," Tobias said. "That's where he kept his business papers." As they climbed the narrow staircase, Eva noticed framed photographs on the walls. Marcus as a young man in formal dress, standing beside what appeared to be mining equipment. Marcus with a group of men in work clothes, all of them grinning at the camera. Marcus alone, older and more serious, standing in front of a mine entrance. The study was small but organized, dominated by a large desk covered with neat stacks of correspondence and ledger books. Eva immediately began examining the papers while Tobias searched the filing cabinets along one wall. "Look at this," Eva said after several minutes of reading. She held up a letter dated 3 weeks before Marcus's death. "It's from someone named Dr. Harrison Kellogg in Denver. He's asking Marcus for detailed medical records of his miners, specifically mentioning the mercury-related health incidents we discussed." Tobias looked up from the file cabinet he was searching. "Kellogg's a territorial health inspector. If Marcus was communicating with him about the poisoning, then he was trying to do the right thing," Eva finished. "Listen to this part. Your cooperation in documenting these cases may help prevent similar tragedies at other mines throughout the territory. The evidence you've provided suggests a pattern of negligence that demands investigation." Eva continued reading through Marcus's correspondence, piecing together a picture of a man caught between competing pressures. Letters from his business partner, Cornelius Ashford, pressed him to maximize production from the silver vein. Letters from creditors demanded payment on loans. But interspersed with these business communications were drafts of letters to territorial authorities, detailed medical records, and what appeared to be a confession. "Tobias, you need to hear this," Eva said, her voice thick with emotion. She had found a letter in Marcus's handwriting, dated the day before his death, addressed to her. "My dearest Evangeline, if you are reading this, then I am dead, and you have arrived in Cedar Ridge to find your intended husband cannot fulfill his promises. I pray you will not judge me too harshly when you learn the truth about why I can no longer live with myself. I have killed 7 good men through my greed and cowardice. I knew the silver vein in the Sunrise mine was contaminated with mercury, knew that working in those conditions was slowly poisoning my employees. But I convinced myself that the danger could be managed, that the money earned would help me implement better safety measures for everyone. I was wrong. Michael Chen died last week, leaving behind a wife and child who trusted me to keep him safe. He is the 7th man to die because I chose profit over their lives. I cannot bear the weight of any more deaths. I have been cooperating with territorial health investigators, providing evidence of the mercury contamination and the cover-up orchestrated by my business partner, Cornelius Ashford. Ashford has powerful friends in Denver who benefit from the illusion that Colorado's silver mines are safe and profitable. They will stop at nothing to prevent this information from becoming public. I fear for my life, Evangeline. If something happens to me before you arrive, please know that I tried to do the right thing in the end. The evidence you need is in the lockbox beneath the floorboards under my desk. Give it to Dr. Kellogg in Denver. He will know what to do. I am sorry I cannot give you the life I promised. You deserve better than a man with blood on his hands. Your regretful correspondent, Marcus Blackwood. Eva's hands trembled as she finished reading. He knew he was going to die. This isn't a suicide note, it's a warning. Tobias knelt beside the desk and began prying up the floorboards with a letter opener. The wood came away easily, revealing a metal lockbox nestled in the space beneath. Inside were medical records, correspondence with Dr. Kellogg, financial documents showing payments made to Silence miners' families, and a detailed map of the mine showing the contaminated sections. This is enough evidence to hang Ashford and half the territorial legislature, Tobias said grimly. No wonder someone killed Marcus. A sound from downstairs made them both freeze. Footsteps deliberately quiet but unmistakably real were crossing the floor below them. Eva felt ice form in her veins as she realized they were no longer alone in the house. Tobias extinguished the lantern, immediately plunging them into darkness. He moved to Eva's side, his hand finding her shoulder in the blackness. Stay quiet, he breathed in her ear. Let me handle this. But even as he spoke, they heard multiple sets of footsteps now and voices speaking in low, urgent tones. Through the floor, Eva could make out fragments of conversation. Documents. Must be destroyed. Check upstairs. No witnesses. Tobias's hand moved to his gun, and Eva realized with crystal clarity that they were trapped. The staircase was the only way down from the study, and armed men were already searching the house below. Even if they could escape the immediate danger, they would be carrying evidence that powerful people were willing to kill to protect. The footsteps began climbing the stairs. Tobias pressed the lockbox into Eva's hands. The window, he whispered urgently. Climb out onto the roof. Follow the ridgeline to the back of the house, then drop into the snow behind the woodshed. I'm not leaving you. You have to. This evidence has to reach Dr. Kellogg no matter what happens to us. The footsteps were halfway up the stairs now. Eva looked at Tobias in the faint moonlight, filtering through the study window, memorizing his face. Then she kissed him quickly, fiercely, tasting fear and determination, and goodbye. Don't you dare die on me, she whispered. I just figured out I love you. Before he could respond, she was at the window, forcing the frozen latch open with numb fingers. The night air hit her like a physical blow as she climbed out onto the snow-covered roof. The lockbox clutched against her chest. Behind her, she heard Tobias call out in a calm, steady voice. Evening, gentlemen. I'm Dr. McKenna. Marcus asked me to retrieve some medical supplies he borrowed. No need for weapons. Eva didn't wait to hear the response. She half crawled, half slid along the steep roof toward the back of the house, her boots slipping on the icy shingles. The snow was falling harder now, which would help conceal her escape, but also make the roof treacherously slick. A gunshot exploded from inside the house, followed immediately by shouting. Eva's heart contracted with terror, but she forced herself to keep moving. If Tobias was injured or worse, the only way to help him was to get the evidence to safety. She reached the back edge of the roof and looked down at the snow-covered ground. It was farther than she had hoped, but not impossible. Taking a deep breath, she pushed off from the roof and dropped into the deep snow beside the woodshed. The impact drove the breath from her lungs and sent pain shooting through her ankle, but she could still move. She hauled herself upright and began making her way through the drifts toward the tree line, using the woodshed to block her from view of the house's windows. More gunshots rang out behind her, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Eva bit back a swing and forced herself to keep moving. Whatever was happening inside that house, her job now was to survive long enough to get Marcus's evidence to someone who could use it. She had made it perhaps 50 yards into the pine trees when she heard voices calling behind her. Someone had discovered her escape route and was following her tracks in the snow. Eva looked down at the obvious trail she was leaving and realized she would never outrun her pursuers through the deep drifts. But she knew these mountains now had listened to Pete Garrison's stories about hidden caves and abandoned mine shafts that honeycombed the landscape. If she could find shelter and wait for her pursuers to give up the search. A memory surfaced, Daniel practicing his sign language, telling her about a place where his father used to take him fishing. A cave behind a waterfall hidden from casual view, but warm enough to shelter in during storms. The boy had described the route, carefully proud of his knowledge. Ava changed direction following Daniel's remembered instructions. The cave was perhaps a mile away uphill through increasingly treacherous terrain, but it was her only chance. The snow continued to fall as she climbed slowly, erasing her tracks and muffling the sounds of pursuit. Her ankle throbbed with each step, and the lockbox seemed to grow heavier with every passing minute. But she pressed on, driven by the memory of Michael Chen's death, of the 6 other miners, whose lives had been sacrificed for silver, of Marcus Blackwood's final attempt at redemption. She found the waterfall by the sound it made beneath its coating of ice, a steady trickle that spoke of moving water even in the depths of winter. The cave entrance was exactly where Daniel had signed it would be a narrow opening concealed by frozen spray and overhanging rocks. Eva crawled inside and discovered a space large enough for several people with evidence that it had been used before. Old firestones, a cache of dry wood, even some preserved food in sealed containers. Daniel and his father had used this place as their secret retreat, and now it might save her life. She built a small fire, reasoning that the smoke would be dispersed by the waterfall, and the cave opening faced away from Marcus's house. As warmth began to fill the stone chamber, Eva opened the lockbox and examined its contents more carefully. What she found made her stomach turn. Medical records showing the progression of mercury poisoning in dozens of miners, not just the 7 who had died. Financial documents proving that Cornelius Ashford had known about the contamination from the beginning and had actively suppressed reports of illness. Letters from territorial officials who had been bribed to ignore safety violations. And most damning of all, a telegram dated the day before Marcus's death. Problem must be eliminated immediately. Arrange accident. Silence guaranteed. CA. Cornelius Ashford had ordered Marcus's murder, and somewhere in that lockbox was enough evidence to destroy his empire and expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of territorial government. Eva spent the night in the cave feeding the fire and studying the documents until she had memorized every detail. By dawn, she had formed a plan. She could not return to Cedar Ridge. Ashford's men would be watching the town waiting for her to surface. But she could reach the main road that led to Denver, and from there she could find help. As the sun rose, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink, Eva carefully repacked the lockbox and prepared to leave her shelter. She had become someone she barely recognized. Not the helpless woman who had stepped off that train just weeks ago, but someone capable of surviving a night alone in the wilderness, of outwitting armed men, of carrying the weight of justice on her shoulders. The journey down the mountain took most of the morning. Eva moved carefully, using game trails and staying within the tree line to avoid detection. Her ankle had stiffened overnight, making each step painful, but she pushed through the discomfort. She was perhaps a mile from the main road when she heard a familiar voice calling her name. Tobias emerged from a stand of aspen trees, and Eva nearly collapsed with relief. He was alive, moving under his own power, though she could see blood on his shirt beneath his open coat. Eva, thank God. He reached her in a few quick strides, gathering her into his arms. I was afraid they'd caught you. What happened? I heard gunshots. 3 men all armed. I managed to wound one and convince them I was just a doctor retrieving medical supplies. They searched the house but didn't find the hiding place under the floorboards. When they realized the box was missing, they assumed I'd taken it. Eva pulled back to look at his face. Are you hurt badly? Bullet grazed my shoulder. I'll live. His eyes found the lockbox in her hands. Please tell me that's what I think it is. Evidence enough to hang Cornelius Ashford and expose this entire conspiracy. Eva's voice was stronger than she felt. But we have to get it to Dr. Kellogg in Denver before Ashford realizes what we have. The main road is being watched. I saw at least 2 men on horseback between here and town. Eva considered their options. They were trapped in the mountains with evidence that powerful men would kill to suppress. But she had not come this far to give up now. There's another way, she said slowly. Pete Garrison mentioned an old mining trail that connects to the Denver road about 20 miles south of here. It's rough going, especially in winter, but it might be our only chance. They spent another day in Daniel's cave, allowing Tobias's wound to begin healing while they planned their route. That evening, as they shared preserved food and kept the fire burning against the mountain cold, Eva found herself studying Tobias's face in the firelight. When I climbed out that window last night, she said quietly, I thought I might never see you again. So did I. His voice was soft. Eva, when this is over, when we've delivered this evidence and seen justice done, yes. I want to build something with you. Not a marriage of convenience, not a partnership born from desperation, but something real and lasting. Eva felt warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the lingering fear and exhaustion. What did you have in mind? A life, a real life together. Maybe here in Colorado, maybe somewhere else entirely. But together. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. I love you too, Tobias McKenna. The words felt like a promise, a commitment to survival and hope, and all the beautiful complications of building a future with another person. They had found each other in the worst of circumstance, had been forged into something stronger by shared danger and mutual support. 2 days later, they reached the outskirts of Denver, travel-worn and exhausted, but carrying evidence that would change everything. Dr. Kellogg received them immediately, his face growing grimmer with each document he examined. "This is exactly what we needed," he said finally. "Mr. Blackwood's cooperation has given us enough evidence to bring formal charges against Ashford and his associates. There will be a territorial investigation, and I suspect several high-ranking officials will find themselves facing prosecution." The wheels of justice turned slowly but inexorably. Cornelius Ashford was arrested within a week, his mining empire placed under territorial oversight. The families of the poisoned miners received compensation, though no amount of money could truly replace their losses. Sheriff Morrison found himself facing federal charges for his role in the cover-up. Eva and Tobias returned to Cedar Ridge as the town's reluctant heroes, though they both insisted they had simply done what needed doing. Sarah Chen offered to sell them the boarding house when she decided to move to Denver with Daniel, who had begun speaking again after learning that his father's death would not go unpunished. "Will you stay here forever?" Daniel signed to Eva on the day before his departure. "I don't know about forever," she replied, "but for as long as this feels like home." The boy smiled and hugged her tightly, then handed her a small carved wooden bird, his parting gift made with his own hands. On a warm spring morning 6 months later, Eva Sterling became Eva McKenna in a simple ceremony attended by most of Cedar Ridge's population. Pete Garrison gave her away, and Sarah Chen returned from Denver to serve as her matron of honor. Even Daniel was there chattering excitedly about his new school and the friends he had made. As Eva and Tobias exchanged vows in the small church overlooking the town, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had left Boston as one person, desperate, dependent, defined by other people's expectations. She was marrying Tobias as someone entirely different, strong, capable, clear about her own worth and desires. The abandoned silver mines still scarred the mountainsides around Cedar Ridge, reminders of the cost of unchecked greed. But new life was growing up around those scars. The town was rebuilding itself on more honest foundations, its people bonded by shared struggle and mutual support. That evening, as Eva and Tobias sat on the porch of their new home, the house Marcus Blackwood had built but never truly lived in, she reflected on the unexpected paths that had led her here. She had come west to marry one man and had ended up marrying another. She had sought security and had found purpose. She had planned to be saved and had learned to save herself. "No regrets?" Tobias asked, following her gaze out toward the mountains where it had all begun. Eva smiled, thinking of the frightened woman who had stepped off that train so many months ago. "Only one." "What's that?" "I wish I could tell that scared girl on the platform that everything was going to turn out better than she could possibly imagine." Tobias laughed, gathering her close against his side. "I think she figured it out eventually." As the sun set behind the peaks painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Eva understood that some journeys could only be completed by letting go of the destination you thought you wanted. She had sought a safe harbor and had found an ocean. She had looked for someone to complete her story and had learned to write her own ending. The future stretched before them, uncertain but no longer frightening. There would be challenges, hardships, moments of doubt and sorrow. But there would also be Daniel's laughter echoing from Denver Sarah's letters, filled with news of her new life, Pete Garrison's stories around the boarding house dinner table. And there would be the solid warmth of Tobias beside her, the mountain air carrying the scent of pine, and possibility, the knowledge that she had become exactly who she was meant to be. Eva Sterling, McKenna survivor and fighter, beloved and brave, home at last in a place she had never imagined but could no longer imagine leaving. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, and Eva made a wish on each one, not for rescue or safety or someone else to solve her problems, but for the courage to keep becoming, keep growing, keep writing new chapters in a story that was finally completely her own. What an incredible journey Eva took, from desperate mail-order bride to confident woman who found love and justice in the Colorado mountains. Sometimes the path we think we're on is just the beginning of the adventure we're meant to have. If you enjoyed Eva and Tobias' story of redemption and romance, please hit that like button and subscribe for more captivating tales from the American frontier. What did you think of Eva's transformation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you. Until next time, keep believing in the power of new beginnings.